I could walk in here to the pool. We see the pool.
Yeah.
And we see the city, and we see how low it is compared to the Temple Mount on the right.
Yeah.
And then when you go a little further, you have an info dot. Now, those info dots are important because if you have internet, then that's a picture that I took of the archaeological findings of that same location we're talking about.
Yeah.
Just wanted to don't interrupt you, but I just wanted to jump in and say this was the first place I went to when I got the app.
Yeah,
you're right, because everyone connects with this. So what we want to do, we want to bring the evidence of what we're doing. I mean, I don't know. You see that road? Let me go here real quick. You see this road right here, right? This road has been discovered.
Yes. Absolutely. You can walk it. In fact, we did when we were in Jerusalem last. It's amazing. Like, you are stepping the steps of pilgrims bygone millennia ago.
Yeah.
That the journey they took for hundreds of years.
We're here at the International Center for World Peace at our studio in London, and we have the pleasure to be speaking with our exciting guest, Rico Cortes, who is running the Wisdom and Torah Ministries. And we met you back in Orlando about a year ago. So yeah, it's really exciting to see you again.
Same here. It was great having you guys. You guys brought a new life to that course over there. It was great.
Yeah, new life and some dancing as well.
You definitely enjoyed it. And, it was really good to see you guys there. And you got to fellowship with different people. Sometimes you feel like you are alone in the middle of nowhere. And then when you got there, you got 100 people and they all enjoy you guys. And I really enjoy having you guys. So I hope you can make it again.
Yeah, we
Thank
had
you. Yeah.
Fond memories of it, and it was some great teaching. And for our guests, the audience who are watching this, the conference we went to was Treasures in the Temple conference. So it was great. And it's happening again in January 2022.
Yes, January 20th to the 23rd. We're going to have 5 teachings a day for 4 straight days to the 23rd, 20th to the 23rd. And it's going to be exciting. We got 3 teachers total. Each teacher is bringing 6 teachings. So we're going to have a lot of information focused on eschatology of the feast, and also the function of the of the temple. It's going to be good.
Okay, great.
Sounds awesome. So you've created a temple, an app, a recreation of the second temple from the second temple period in Jerusalem. So what inspired you to create this app?
Well, the story goes that, as you all know, my teacher, Joseph Good. All the research is really his work, 42 years worth of research. He's been working cooperatively with people in Israel, archaeologists and rabbis, temple people. And I've been studying with him for like 10 years. We've been researching, we've been doing this. As a matter of fact, I started a temple course because I was studying with him one-on-one, and I felt that more people needed to hear him. And he's taught me a lot. I'm very grateful. So there was a temple app that came out from Brigham Young University, BYU University. And we saw it, and I used it on the temple course 3 years ago because it was the only one we had. So, but they had a lot of mistakes because they didn't use all of the research that Joe has. So what I did, I got in contact with the people at BYU, and they sent me to the creators of it. Now, these people, they work with John Cameron, the movie star, the movie director John Cameron, I think his name is, for all the great movies like Lord of the Rings and all that stuff. Yeah. This guy, Yaron, he has an organization in Utah, and they do all temple stuff. And they're like high-level virtual reality app makers of stuff. It's incredible. So I got together with them. I went all the way to Utah to meet them. And I told them, I said, guys, we love your model, but we cannot use it We have research. Can we do something? Can we exchange and do whatever? And they came up with the app based on Joe Good's research. I had some to do with some of the information, but it was actually Joseph Good's research of 42 years. It's our way to preserve all of his work. And as a matter of fact, today, before I was able to get to do this interview, I was talking to a rabbi in Jerusalem who is using our virtual reality and our app to teach children in Israel. So he is one of the leading authorities of the temple in Israel. So that's how good the information is. We use all Jewish sources: history, archaeology, topography, biblical evidence, everything, to bring the best possible information about what the temple looked like in the first century.
Yeah, just to share some information with our audience as well. I mean, this app is incredible. I was blown away by it because actually just before we flew out to your conference, I'd been in Israel for the first time in my life, and I was walking around Israel and just looking around the old city and thinking about like what was the old city like in Jerusalem times. And 2 weeks later we flew out to Orlando, and you literally got to see it. Both we got to see it in virtual reality, but we also got to see it in your smartphone app. And now I have the app, and it's incredible the amount of work you've done, the amount of detail, the amount of history. It brings the Bible to life in a really amazing way.
The next thing that we're working on, and that's the idea of Yaron, the creator of the app. You can find it on your app store, on Android app, or you can put it on your iPad, on your MacBook Pro, MacBook of Apple, but not on the Windows yet. But you can project it to the TV like I do, so you can do presentations. And I've done it at a place where you can use a huge screen and they can see it. It changes the dynamic of your studies, because now when you talk about a verse and you literally see what that happened, now you are painting a picture that normally people don't understand. They just see a black letters on white paper. And what we're trying to do is convey the archaeology. I don't know if you guys remember when we were showing pictures. That was my idea. I said, hey, can we put pictures of what it looks like today compared to what it looks like in the app? And the guy says, oh yeah, we can do that. So the next thing we're going to do is, and there's something we're working with them on, is do mini courses in which I'm going to record something for about 5-10 minutes in a certain area of the temple, or you can be walking with me in the temple as I'm doing the class. And that's going to really bring a different dimension of interaction to understand the dimensions and the entries and all that stuff. It's incredible. We're really excited. If we only had $1 million, we can do a lot more. But for right now, the Lord blessed us to do this. It's a great beginning.
Absolutely. And for the people who may not have experienced the app firsthand, Tim has it on his phone. My phone is actually, it hasn't got the right programs to run it, but I've seen it on Tim's phone. But to describe it to our audience who might be listening to this podcast who haven't had the visuals on the app or haven't got the app yet, what would they experience in opening up the app? What can they actually do with it? Where can they actually go? What will they actually see?
One of the advantages that we have, we can cast it into, I'm opening here on my phone.
Sure.
And then I'm going to show you from my desktop into the extended screen, a big TV that I have. So now you can do that. So as I go in here, you hit start. It shows you the temple. You see great resolution.
Yeah.
And then it's in English and Spanish, the language, all the info dots. So we have info dots in here. I'm showing it in the phone, and then I'm going to show you in the screen. Okay, you got info dots here, and you can manipulate and walk in through as if you have a game.
Yeah.
And then you go through the door. When you get to a door, you just go through it. You can go through every room. You can go through tunnels. You can go on top of go up the stairs, go up a ladder. I mean, I can show you that. If you allow me, I can share the screen. Can I do that?
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. We'd love to see that.
If you don't mind, I will show you how I use it in my studies. So I'm sharing my screen, and what you see now is the app. Okay. You can see it on the screen. Music will come up, so you'll hear the music. But this is the city. That's the city of Jerusalem. That's the city of Jerusalem, and it's all according to topography and geography. That's the difference. We're using the geography and the topography of Jerusalem in the first century, what it would have looked like, and put it together with the city. You can literally walk anywhere. If I go to any of the little blue men there, you can walk anywhere. You can click on that. Let me go. Did you walk through the Jaffa Gate?
I have to admit, I've not had a chance to explore everything in the temple because there's a lot.
No, but when you went to
Yes.
Jerusalem.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. We
Okay, when you went to Jerusalem, you walked through the Jaffa Gate and you went all the way where the shops are, right?
Yeah.
Go down the thing.
Sure.
We're gonna walk that same passage, the original street. That's still the same pathway that it was in the temple period. Okay. So if you notice here, you can look.
Yeah.
Wow.
Is the music bothering you guys?
No, it's great.
Okay. So you can see here the city to the right. And literally I could walk, and I'm walking through I'm walking right now through a bridge that had dual purpose. At the bottom, it had water conduits from the Pools of Siloam coming all the way to the upper and the lower city.
Yeah.
And this is coming to the temple from the west. And by the way, today, the Western Wall, we are approaching it right now. And I'm going to take you to the corner right here. Can you imagine thousands of people walking through it?
Absolutely.
And you see the wall right in front of you.
Yeah, and what you're seeing, you're literally walking the steps Jesus and the disciples stepped out 2,000 years ago, and it brings the Bible and the scripture and the geographical context alive like nothing else that we've seen.
So as we walk through, if you look down there, we bring this down a little bit. So as we walk through all the way to there, you can look to the left, that's north. You see the whole city.
Yeah.
You can walk everywhere. Whoa, I went out the wrong way. Okay, that's fine. Okay. So I'm walking through, I jumped the bridge. But to give you an idea and a sense of we need to have a sense of how big this thing was.
Yeah.
Now you see how high the wall was?
Yeah.
One thing we need to remember is that today, the Western Wall, what you see, if you went to the Western Wall, you see this arch right here.
Yeah.
So you see how low that is down there? So right now people are praying halfway of what the wall used to be.
Right.
Because if you follow my little cursor, you can see it right here. That's where everybody goes in today.
Yeah.
So literally the temple, the Western Wall, people are praying over here. About 45 feet. I don't know how much is that in meters. About 45 feet above the size of what you see today in the Western Wall.
About 15 meters. And, and really what you're showing here is that accuracy has been really important to this app and this project. And we're quite curious, and I'm sure our audience is what kind of research has gone into this? Because I know that the guys at BYU, you mentioned that they had this temple, they designed it, but there were things that were maybe not accurate. Of course, you've mentioned Joseph Good, that is a 40-year researcher on the temple. But what kind of material resources did you use so you can make this as real as possible?
Okay, that's the great information. What Joe and I did, we studied, he studied, just to give you some names, all of the Eilat Mazar's archaeological findings, and Benjamin Mazar, Dan Bahat, Orik Pelek Barkat, which we know personally. She's the one who is the expert on the royal stoa in the temple. Let me show you what that is. The royal stoa is found where the red building is right here.
Yeah. And for those who, I don't know if this is accurate, but I was researching recently about the royal stoa, and some say that this is where potentially Jesus threw out the money changers in John 2. I don't know if that's something you're familiar with or... That's
exactly what it is, because we have the resource from the Talmud that tells us that Hanan, which Ananias,
Yeah.
who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas. He had 5 sons, 1 son-in-law, and a grandson, who they were all high priests, and they all dominated the market. And all along this particular place, there was one of the wonders of the world, the ancient world, and it has shops. They had everything there at that time. So one of the leading authorities in archaeology, her sole focus is that area. She's our consultant and she helps us with it. So whatever you see has been validated by the archaeologist. So an archaeological student can see it. They go, oh yeah, we know what that is. And and then we keep improving in whatever they keep finding. So we use all of the archaeology we can find in Israel for the Israeli society. We found all the Jewish sources that speaks of the temple, the Mishnah, the letter of Arstia, Philo, Josephus, Talmud, the scriptures clearly, and we put it all together in its context. Also, archaeology, topography, geography. I have a whole book. If this book right here, In the Shadow of the Temple by Ben Dov, he talks a lot about the temple and the research. Sure. Then this book is very significant. It's out of print, okay? And it's by Shimon Gibson and David Jacobson. It's Below the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, a source book of the cisterns, subterranean chambers, and conduits of the Temple Mount. So therefore, you have all of the research validated by the Palestine Exploration Fund, which allows us to know exactly where everything was, the type of cubit that we were using. Joe found that there were 3 types of cubits that was used to build the temple in different areas. For example, the area that we're at right now is holy, but it's not holier than the inner temple. So they use different cubits of measurements. So that's one of the things that Lean Rittmeyer also understood, and some of the other scholars, Benjamin Mazar. So we're looking at the scope of everything. Charles Warren, Charles Wilson, Conrad Sheik, and we are looking at everything. We're not discriminating based on if they were Christians or Jewish or whatever. We want to do whatever we can to find the best available information for the app. And it is extremely important to do that. So one of the benefits of what we're doing, by the way, I want to thank you for the opportunity, is you see the floor right there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That floor, if you go to the City of David, they have an illustration of it at the entrance of the shop. And that's why I saw it when I take my tours to Israel. About 3 years ago, they pulled it out. The archaeological information put out. They found the remnant in the sifting project, and they found what the patterns of the temple would look like. So they put it down. I took a picture. I sent it to the guys in Utah, and they put it all over the temple. So when Dan Baha, when what's her name? Orik Peleg, Dr. Orik Peleg, Barkat saw the floor, they got excited because they know what it means. We are putting an archaeological student can look at our temple model, and they'll be able to see the doors, and they'll be able to see the frames, and they'll be able to see evidence of what they've been digging. And that's really what we want. We want to be able to have a rabbinical student who read the Mishnah and studies from the sources, open our app, and they can understand everything according to the sources. I go to churches and I go to congregations all the time, and I'm showing them the app, and I say, okay, this verse right here? Now let me show you what that happened and where it is in the temple. And they're blown away because they never put a visual to what they're reading. And that's what we're trying to do. This will be a great tool for homeschooling. And I got my master's now. So what I'm trying to do is I want to pursue my doctorate, not because I'm interested in titles, but it's because eventually I'm not going to be able to travel as much. So I would like to teach in colleges and schools and use the app and teach the proper context of the temple and the New Testament using this stuff, instead of just people who don't study it assuming stuff. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, I was just going to say this has got to be such an amazing resource for university students, for people studying archaeology and theology. I mean, it's really incredible.
And it is incredible, because let me show you an example of this in the Pool of Siloam. The Bible talks about the miracle in the Pool of Siloam, which is in the bottom of the the bottom of the city of David, all the way where the Chinon and the Kidron meet, the two valleys there. Okay. So if I go to that area, all the way to the left, Pool of Siloam, I could literally walk in here. I could walk in here to the pool. We see the pool.
Yeah.
And we see the city, and we see how low it is compared to the Temple Mount on the right.
Yeah.
And then when you go a little further, you have an info dot. Now, those info dots are important because if you have internet, then that's a picture that I took of the archaeological findings of that same location we're talking about.
Yeah.
I just wanted to, don't interrupt you, but I just wanted to jump in and say this was the first place I went to when I got the app.
Yeah.
You're right. Because everyone connects with this. So what we want to do, we want to bring the evidence of what we're doing. I mean, I don't know. You see that road? Let me go here real quick. You see this road right here, right? This road has been discovered.
Yes, absolutely. You can walk it. In fact, we did when we were in Jerusalem last.
Right.
It's amazing. Like, you are stepping the steps of pilgrims bygone millennia ago.
Yeah.
That the journey they took for hundreds of years. You mentioned an info dot just back. For the people who haven't used the app, these are little scroll icons that are dotted around the temple. And I know that you can actually click on the scroll dot, and in that case, you saw a picture of the actual place now. But I know that other info dots, you can click on them and they give you information, for example, from the Mishnah. And this is one source that you have used in putting the information about the temple together. But for our audience, they might not necessarily know what the Mishnah is. Can you explain a little bit about what the Mishnah is and how it is important in understanding a lot about the second temple, or Herod's temple?
Yeah. In the scholarly world, primary sources are very important. A primary source is somebody who saw it, a primary source, a witness. You got secondary sources, just like you have primary use of a stone and a secondary use. That means that if this building is destroyed and you conquer the city and it's destroyed, you use the same stones to build something a little bit farther down. So you're using the same stone for a secondary use for another building. So when it comes to archaeological evidence and history, Josephus falls under the category of primary source because a lot of the things that he wrote about the temple, he saw it. He was a priest.
Right.
So that's why I put a lot of validity to what Josephus says as a really good resource. Not that it's above the Bible, but it gives me a better definition. If I'll get to compare between someone's opinion and Josephus, I'll tend to go more with Josephus as a credible source because he was there.
Right.
That's always true with the letter of Aristeas. The letter of Aristeas, a Jewish guy from the dispersion who came to Israel, I think during the before, I'm not sure if it was the early part of the Herodian period or the latter part of the Hasmonean period. I can't remember. But he saw it, so he wrote it down. He describes the temple, he describes the veil, he describes everything, a whole bunch of stuff. Then you have Eliezer ben Yaakov. Now, Eliezer ben Yaakov is a priest who lived in the first century, and he wrote down 3 tractates or 3 chapters in the Mishnah called Yomah that explains to you everything that happens on the Day of Atonement. Midot, which explains to you the measurements of the buildings and the temple, and Tamid, which explains to you everything that took place from the moment they got up in the morning into the last offering in the afternoon. So now we have primary sources allowing us to get a glimpse of everyday life in the temple. And then we put that together with the Bible. The Bible always overrules everything. But you got to remember that many things within the scripture is not describing the service. The reason is not because the audience that the Bible was written to, they understood what was going on in the temple. We are not aware of it because we are from the Western world. So what we've done, we've taken all the primary sources, people who saw, and say, okay, let's compare that information. So what you're going to see with our app is in one info dots, we got over 250, I think, all over the whole temple app. We got pictures, we got archaeological evidence, historical, we have rabbinical, we have biblical. We put it all together. So that way you can have a study. And now you can see and you can walk and you can perceive and you can see a picture what it looked like today. You can see the evidence from archaeological findings. I mean, and we're getting ready to do an update sometime in next year when we get more funds, that is going to really blow people's mind because we're adding more information. You know, a lot of the information in this book is going to be added to it. And this is validated by archaeological information. So therefore, we're going to be able to take, for example, this particular cistern, we're going to take a picture of that and we're going to locate it where it is found in the Temple Mount. And we're going to put in the information. We're going to put in more the height of the cistern. We want to be able to go into the cistern. You know, I mean, there's a lot of stuff we can do, and it only would enhance your understanding of Scripture. Let me give an example. When we go to the temple again, so an example of information that I think you need to know, more for those people who are more interested into the technical measurements. A rabbi will look at this. An archaeologist will look at this. Maybe for the regular layman, then they go like, who cares, you know, how big it was. But once you understand the sizes of it, because we are commanded in Ezekiel chapter 43, verse 10 to 12, to study the entrances, the measurements, the exits, everything. So in this particular infodot, it tells us information we need to know. From the Mishnah, it gives you the rabbinical source, Mishnah, Midot, measurements, chapter 2, paragraph 5. And it says, Ezrat Nashim, it's a Jewish source. Ezrat Nashim is the court of the women, was 135 cubits by 135 cubits. And there were 4 chambers in each corner, 40 cubits each. Okay, but it's going to give you measurements in a minute, so bear with me. It says, so they were not roofed. Now, why is this important? Because when Paul did the Nazarite vow in Acts 21, he went into one of those chambers. See, that it was part of the protocol of Numbers chapter 6, announcing the ending of the Nazarite vow. He needed to go to one of the chambers to cut the hair and put it under a cauldron in there and eat of the offering, the peace offering that, you know, he needed to boil there. So, I mean, now we can put the location to what Acts 21 is talking about. Okay. And it says, and they were not roofed, and so they will be in the future. Thus, as he took me out of the outer courtyard, see, so and then it's quoting Ezekiel 46, verse 21 and 22. So now you can go to Ezekiel and compare the same information because it's information from Ezekiel. Now watch, let me turn around. You see that info that's right here in front of me is the cubit explained. Now it's going to give you about the dimensions that we use, that Joseph Good, actually, he found one of the cubits. So, and by the way, he brought, for what I understand, Joseph Good used to work in conjunction with the Temple Institute as a consultant, more or less, like an outsider trying to help. And he brought in over 100, a lot of 100 corrections. Well, they never gave him credit because he believes in Yeshua.
When you say he found the cubit, did he find a cubit measurement, or what did he find? An archaeological finding that could
a cubit measurement.
Oh wow, that's
okay. For what I understand, I hope I quoted him correctly. So the standard measurements used in this model are cubit. It's called an amma, a handbreadth, tefah, handbreadth, according to both the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, and the Mishnah. Ezekiel 40, verse 5, and the Mishnah Kelim 17:10. So let me go to Ezekiel 40 real quick. Ezekiel 40 actually tells you the dimension, but you got to pay attention to the language used in the temple, and that's the problem. If we don't study the temple, you're not going to see it. I read this stuff forever and never really noticed until he goes, wait a minute, what is that? And I paid attention. I go, oh, I get it, So you need someone who can help you. So it's 40 verse 5. It says, and behold, there was a wall all around the outside of the temple area. Okay, all around the wall. And it says, and their length of the measuring reed in the man's hand was six long cubits, each being a cubit and a handbreadth. You see, So it's telling you in this particular area, they're using a greater dimension than certain other area within the temple. Some of them were 5, some of them in this case 6. What's interesting is that the greater cubit in dimension was reserved for a greater level of holiness, of buildings in a greater level of holiness. It's like you saying, I built my house with a particular measurement in the living room, in my son's room, in my guest room, but my room is going to be bigger. I'm using a bigger dimension because it's more of a personal space for you and your wife. So in the temple is the same way. The moment you go from the court of Israel to the court of the women to the court of Israel, they are using a different cubit because it represents the greater level of holiness and God's presence. So even within the measurements, you know that you're going up to a greater commitment in your spiritual life, your walk. Kind of cool.
Yeah.
You know?
It's amazing how the temple and its architecture lead you in to a greater connection with God, and each kind of phase, if you like, teaches you something about your walk and about your relationship with God.
Well, that's really the whole intent. And many people get lost in, it's dimension here, cubit there. They're missing the really essence behind that. That when you go from one court to the next one, you go into a higher level of holiness. So even in the measurement, let me give you an example of this. If I turn around here, you see those steps right there? Those steps are called the 15 steps that lead from the court of the women to the court of Israel. Okay, so they use a cubit here, but then in the steps leading to the holy place, they use a greater cubit. So the steps are higher because you're literally going from one level of holiness to a next one. But you know what used to be done in those steps right there? The Songs of Ascent.
Yes.
Psalm 120 to 134, they were sang on those 15 steps.
Right.
So now you read the Psalms, but you never make a connection. When, what time, where, and how. And that's what we're trying to bring to this table. We're trying to bring this to the table, the measurements and the information.
And we can see that these different locations actually are locations where real things and real events happened. And you earlier mentioned the Apostle Paul going into the temple to do an Nazirite vow. And this is quite an interesting thought here. This is an interesting happening because even after Yeshua, Jesus had come, the new covenant had begun. You see the apostles and disciples interacting with temple and the temple life. And even Jesus himself did. And if we think about that, sometimes in Christian theology, the temple is just seen as an Old Testament construct. And that's where it resides and that's where it should be. And of course, we live in a post-temple world now. And yet Jesus and the apostles interacted with the temple. Why is that important? What can that tell us about Jesus' attitude to the temple and therefore what our attitude to the temple should be?
Well, that's a really good question. And I wish more people would ask, because the moment you start asking that question, you will recognize how important the temple was for the first century life of every believer in Yeshua. In Acts chapter 6, I think chapter 6, verse 7, can't remember right now, apologize. My brain is a little fried. But it says that many of the priests believe in Yeshua. The word of the Lord grew in Jerusalem, and many of the priests believed in Yeshua. In Acts chapter 3, verse 1, it tells you that Peter and John were going up to the temple at the 9th hour, the hour of prayer. Wait a minute. If you go to Numbers chapter 28, you get to know exactly what's happening in the temple at the 9th hour, which is the afternoon lamb. And it was taking place by services and prayer. So now we made a connection. The Bible is telling us that Peter and John were going up to the temple to pray after Yeshua died and resurrected. But wait a minute. They told me that was done away with. But yet in the 40 days that Yeshua, after the resurrection, you don't find not one shred of evidence in which the Messiah said anything against the priesthood, anything against the sacrifices, anything against the temple, anything about the office of the priesthood and its validity. He supported it, and he never mentioned anything. There's not one word that speaks against the temple. In Acts chapter 20, verse 16, it tells us that Paul was hastening so he can get to Jerusalem to celebrate Pentecost. Well, wait a minute. That happened 28 years after Yeshua died and resurrected. Why is he going up to Jerusalem to celebrate the feast? Then in chapter 21, you have James, the brother of our master Yeshua, telling Paul to do a Nazirite vow. Well, I'm really confused because now James says how the myriads of Jews that believe in the law, and they were all zealous for the law. And he says, go do what we tell you. Go take 4 men and do a vow. Finish your vow. And he did it, which includes 3 sacrifices, according to Numbers chapter 6. So, ladies and gentlemen, the evidence that we see in the New Testament, if you learn the temple, it will come out. It's like a highlighter when you put it in the Bible.
Yeah.
You know, it comes out at you. You go, wait a minute. It's right there. For example, in the book of Acts, there's one verse that everyone kind of gloss over, in which it is said that Paul was traveling after the fast.
Yeah.
And the book of Acts says that. Well, the fast is the idiom for Yom HaKippurim, the Day of Atonement. But when you study maritime travel in the Mediterranean, like I did, then you know that in the Mediterranean, the most optimum time to travel will be from the spring into right before, before Sukkot. After Sukkot, the seas are very rough, and we have evidence of a shipwreck proving the point. So now we have the language. If you don't study the temple, you're going to read that verse in the book of Acts like the fast, and you're not going to connect it with the Day of Atonement. So this is why the temple study is so significant, and why for 40 years, everyone was going to the temple for worship. Because after it was destroyed, it was a different story.
So, Rico, you've just explained the activities of Jesus, Yeshua, and the apostles being very much connected to the temple, and that Jesus did not mention or talk against the temple. And sometimes in Christian theology, some people feel that Jesus was almost antagonistic against the temple, and that he felt that its utility was complete, that it had no longer any need in the Christian's life. And they might turn to a verse in Matthew 12 where Jesus says to those present amongst them, he says that the one who stands here is greater than the temple. Of course, he was talking about himself. He was the word that was made flesh and tabernacled among us, which John 1 explains. But what are your thoughts on that? Was Jesus being antagonistic to the temple, even though his activities were related to the life of the temple?
Well, I don't think Yeshua would ever be against the house of his father. We have to consider going back to its history in the time of the Hasmonean period and the Hellenistic period. Before that, there was the Seleucid period. And when we look into history, we know how the Pharisees came to be. There were no Pharisees at the time of Ezra. That happened much 200 years later, 230 years later, because of the need to preserve sacred space, the need to maintain your identity as Israel, because the people were going after the idolatry of the Greeks. And in the first century, the corruption by the leadership. Herod was not a son of David. He was an Edomite. He was a king, and he's not supposed to. Only the sons of David are supposed to. Caiaphas or Ananias, they were sons of Zadok, but they were corrupted. They were supposed to hold the office, but they were corrupted. They lost the essence of the fear of God. They put more effort into looking at the building and making it so pretty, but then if it's corrupted, what's the use? In America today, we have a problem with, we have a leader whose son is a mess, and we have the leadership projecting something that it goes against the principles of our country. Well, he lives in a beautiful white house, but what's the use if it's rotten from the inside out? And that's exactly the problem in the time of Yeshua. They took the temple building and they made that greater than God. It looks so beautiful. Great job, Herod. But wait a minute, it's corrupted. The people corrupted it. The office is holy. The temple was ordained by God, but we missed our mission. We defiled his sacred space. Now Yeshua is putting them on their head. He's saying, like, you don't understand, man. You don't understand what's in the midst of you.
Yeah.
You know, God is not doing away with his temple, but he's sick of the corruption within it. And Yeshua was representing the righteousness, the justice when he healed the sick, took care of the homeless, took care of the needy, took care of the widows, resurrected the dead, interceded on behalf of the people. You know, sometimes the temple may look beautiful, but if the people inside are not God-fearing, it loses its function, the purpose.
Yeah, so it really had a utility even when the new covenant had come. It still had a function and a purpose in the life and the faith of the early believers.
Well, of course, just like it will come back again in millennial reign. I mean, the book of Ezekiel clearly tells us there will be offerings in the temple and the priests. And it even tells you that the prince, in this case, Messiah, who will be our king on the earth, but he's the prince of God, he's going to be bringing offerings to the temple. How about that?
Yeah.
By the way, people don't realize that when Yeshua was alive before the death and resurrection, he would bring offerings to the temple. How about that? But when people object to that stuff, it's because they don't know the temple. They assume that what Yeshua come to do would eliminate anything that God has established. And it's just a lack of understanding of biblical context. And I highly recommend you consider an opportunity to study this beautiful topic that would enhance your understanding. Last example, when you go to the book of Revelation, go to Revelation 4. And hopefully this will be new for you guys, but I know you guys study, but maybe the audience.
All right, there are sometimes things that are new for us.
After in chapter 4, the book of Revelation, after this I looked, and behold, the door standing open in heaven. And the first voice which I heard speaking to me was like a trumpet, saying, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this." Well, you asked anyone in the system of religion, what time of the year is that? They're not aware of it. Even people in the Torah world, they'll say, "Well, that's trumpets." Well, how do you know? Well, they're sounding the trumpet. Well, the same thing happens in 5, 6, 7, and 8. They don't know which time in the year you sound trumpets. Now the Bible tells you, but we don't study the temple. But the expression "open a door open," standing door open in heaven, that was an idiom for the day of trumpets. Now, when you read chapter 8, it's talking about the context of the Day of Atonement, because it tells you that in verse 2, "And I saw 7 angels who stand before God, 7 trumpets were given to them. And another angel came and stood at the altar with a golden censer, and he was given much incense to offer with the prayers of all the saints on the golden altar of incense." 3 different things: the altar, the golden censer, and the golden altar of incense. Well, wait a minute. That's the Day of Atonement. Because only on the Day of Atonement, you would introduce the golden censer into the temple and the Holy Holies. In the rest of the year, they use a silver censer. Only on the Day of Atonement, you use the golden censer. So understanding the temple, its services, its functions, then you understand what time of the year the Bible is talking about. Now, if you go to verse 11, it says, "The name of the star is wormwood, and a third of the waters become wormwood, bitter, and many people died from the water because it has been made bitter." Wait a minute. That's Numbers chapter 5, the bitter waters. Deuteronomy chapter 19 and 20, when they worship the golden calf, Moses grinded down the golden calf and made everyone drink it. Well, if you look at the screen right here real quick, okay, let me share it again. If you look at the screen right here, I'm going to take you to the place where they used to take the women accused of idolatry. I'm sorry, not idolatry, but sexual immorality.
Sure.
Okay, you see the door on the right here?
Yeah.
This is the place when you will take the woman to drink the bitter waters. So chapter 8 is dealing with temple functions. This is divine judgment. So how can we talk about the book of Revelation and prophecy and never look at the temple and the feast? Or not the feast, because this is about Yom Kippur, Yom Teruah, which is not a feast. It's actually Yom Tov. It's a holy day. So now we want to be prophets, but we don't know anything about the temple. Yet, 95% of all the prophets were priests. Ezekiel, Haggai, Ezra, Isaiah, Jeremiah. Are you getting the picture?
That's fascinating.
Samuel, they were all descendants of priests because they're the royal messengers. So how can we study prophecy? How can we study end times if we don't study the temple? When everything is placed in order by the timetable of God. Everything happens in his timetable. Hopefully that answers your question.
Absolutely.
That's a fascinating answer, and it's so interesting to hear how the temple helps us understand the plan of God and how God is revealing his truth.
Man, there's a huge eschatology. Joseph Curtis has a series, and I tell you, I highly recommend you all get it. He gives you history, archaeology, all the evidence, showing you the language of eschatology. Even in the Siddur, the prayer book, man, you read some of the stuff in here, you're going like, wait a minute. I mean, this is all about the Messiah, about second coming, about the temple. So everything is designed to teach us a protocol, to respect God's holiness, to understand function, to understand purpose. And the reason why, let me read you a verse. I like speaking through verses.
Yeah. It's a safe bet.
And I know in England, for many years, people study the Bible. Sadly, in America and the United States, and in England and in Canada, they're not really studying Bible anymore. That's why we have so much chaos. Yeah. But when you look into Ezekiel 44, all right, in Ezekiel 44, verse 23 and 24, it says this. The priests, because in verse 15, talks about the Levitical priests, the sons of Zadok. But in 23 and 24 says this. They shall teach my people the difference between holy and common, and show them to distinguish between unclean and clean. Now I'm going to come back to that verse in a minute and connect it to Acts 10. But let me continue. And in a dispute, they shall act as judges, and they shall judge it according to my judgments. They shall keep my laws, my statutes, and all my appointed feasts, and they shall keep my Sabbath holy. And last week's Torah portion was Shoftim, judges. Okay, so now watch this. When you go to Acts chapter 10, have we ever studied the difference between holy and profane, clean and unclean? Ask anyone in the whole Christian world, Messianic world, whatever you want to call it. We don't study it. We're not exposed to that. In the book of Acts chapter 10, verse 28 says this. Peter speaking now. He said to them, to Cornelius and his family, you yourselves know how unlawful it is for a Jew to associate with or visit anyone of another nation. But God has shown me that I should not call any person common and unclean. Wait a minute. So what is the issue in Acts 10? The sheet with all the animals, is it about eating that? Or is it God comparing the unclean to the condition of Cornelius and how God cleansed Cornelius and allowed him to be in the kingdom, because Cornelius was a righteous man, morally upright, who was praying to the God of Israel, and God shows no partiality. But it's using temple terms.
Yeah. Right. And this is a fascinating point, because much of what we've talked about today is, of course, about the temple and its place in its operations and its place in the life of Jesus and the disciples. And of course, we can get a better historical understanding of this building. But really what you've just outlined here is that the study of the temple has a practical application to your walk of faith in 21st century Western life. And maybe you like to kind of share a point here, because some people feel like, well, the study of the temple is divorced from my life, my practical living. But actually, the study of the temple and the things that you've outlined actually has a very personal and practical application. And maybe you'd like to share a thought about why that is.
A very simple way. Let me connect it this way. A married couple, they have a house. They have their marriage bed. They have their own bedroom. Can any other man or any other woman allowed to go sleep in that bed? No, except for the married couple. It will be a huge transgression for the husband or the wife to invite anyone else to partake of that bed. Just like my children, when they come visit me, one is 29 and the other one is 24. When they want to go into our room, which is sacred space for my wife and I, they knock on the door. Then we ask them to come in because it's sacred space. Well, there's a common area in my house everyone can be at. If I assigned you a room in my house, that becomes your sacred space, even though it's my house. Well, we respect those rules. I'm not going to go to your house and open the refrigerator. I'm not going to go to your house, sit in your chair. I'm not going to go to your house and tell you how to cook. I'm not going to go to your house and go lay down in your bed, because I understand there's a protocol of respect in your house as a guest. How come we don't apply that to the house of God? How come the whole world says we can go into the Holy of Holies when not even Yeshua can go into the Holy of Holies on the earth?
Right. And in the Western world, the whole concept of sacred space has been missing. I was listening to a podcast by N.T. Wright, and he expressed in that podcast that much of his life had been devoid of a theology of sacred space, because after the Protestant movement away from kind of cathedrals and all of that idolatry, actually the Protestant movement moved away from this concept of sacred space. But yet the temple can bring us back into what it means to have certain space which is holy, and therefore we should be cautious, and therefore we should approach it in a right manner and a right attitude.
Well, let me ask you, and this is a great example of what you're talking about, because N.T. Wright is correct. And, that's what I've learned through the temple, sacred space, how to respect God's feast, how to respect his holy things. His name is holy. So let's say that you are outside in the summer and you are really, really sweaty and you stinky, you don't smell good. Then you go in the house, you see your wife and you want to give her a hug. She's going to stop you. She's going to say, no, go take a shower, dude. Go take a shower. Okay, now let me show the other extreme. You take a shower, then you come and you can give her a hug. You are presentable for intimacy.
Yes.
But what if you're dressed with the most expensive suit, wearing the most expensive cologne, bringing the most expensive ring, but you committed adultery? Does it really matter to the woman whether or not you look great? Because your heart morally is corrupt, and now you're not going to be able to approach her? That's what idolatry is in the Bible. Idolatry is that creates a separation of covenantal relationship in which now you have to leave God's sacred space, God's holiness, because moral behavior is what separates us from the presence of God. But if you touch something unclean, or if you did something unwillful, you still, it's like when you get your wife upset, and then you didn't do anything major, you just got her upset. You go buy her a flower and you go, I love you so much, honey, I'm so sorry. And she goes, oh, okay. Well, that's exactly what the temple protocol is. When you do something wrong unwillfully, you still want to come to the presence of the Lord. He's going to say, sure, come on over, take a shower. You stink. Yeah. And then once you take a shower, the ritual, bring your best. And we're good. Yeah. But if you commit moral behavior, then there's a separation. By the way, that's exactly the context of Mark chapter 7. The Pharisees were imposing on the regular people ritual purity from Jerusalem and the temple way outside of Jerusalem instead of focusing on moral behavior. And Yeshua called them out. You see that in verse 10. He gets, for Moses says, honor your father and your mother, and whatever reviles father and mother must surely die. But you say, if a man tells his father and his mother, whatever you will have gained from me is korban, that is given to God, then you no longer permit him to do anything from his father and mother. It says korban. That means offering. They are using a temple term to describe the corruption in which these people, they are not willing to help their parents because they're using temple protocol as an excuse not to help their parents. Yeshua's calling them out. You're like a white sepulcher, man. You look beautiful on the outside, but inside you're dead because you're morally corrupt. So defiling on the person, when you keep reading, it tells you later on what defiles you is not what comes here on the outside. Yeah. What defiles you is what comes from the inside. Verse 21, he says, for from within, out of the heart of man, some evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, coveting, wickedness, deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within and defile that person. Now that you just forgot to wash your hands before you ate outside of the temple. If you went to the temple, you have to wash your hands and feet. But outside of the temple, these people wanted them to do that instead of helping the family. And Yeshua called them out. But the point is, they're using temple language.
Absolutely.
And we're not going to understand what is holy and profane if we don't study the temple.
And interestingly, the individual believer is called the temple. And so that practical application of what the temple can teach us really pertains to us as the individual believer.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting seeing how the priests had this immense discipline in their lives and how that translates into how we should be treating ourselves as in our Christian journey and ordering our lives with tremendous discipline and prayer, and how that translates in how we should approach God.
That was the point of Corinthians. First Corinthians, Paul is bringing correction because the Corinthians, which by the way, I found in my research that Paul is not talking to the slaves or the freedmen. He's talking to the plebeians and the patricians that have special privileges in the Greco-Roman world. And Paul is saying in 1 Corinthians 1, he's talking to the whole assembly, ecclesia, the whole congregation. And he's bringing correction because some of them are worshiping other gods. They're eating meat sacrificed to idols. There was an imperial Rome. They had games, and then they will do meat sacrifice to the idols in huge dining halls that every citizen of Rome, every Roman citizen within Corinth had the right to go and partake of that. And if you were a believer in Yeshua of the upper ranks, of the upper caste, then you have the right to do that. That's why Paul says, for me, all permissible, for not everything is good, because he was a Roman citizen. And what happens is Paul is using temple idioms to show the congregation that is not the behavior of the kingdom of God. You need to behave. Don't you know that you're the temple? Don't you know that you're supposed to behave with the righteousness and the purity of what would happen in God's temple? That's why people eat food that is not permissible in the Torah and the commandments. They assumed that Acts chapter 10 is giving them freedom to do so. And that's why the moment it talks about common and unclean, now you know it's talking about temple language, and you need to really examine what the real issue is. Is it the food in the sheet, or is it the condition of humanity? And how Cornelius, living as a righteous person from the nations, was being accepted by God to receive salvation as a gift like anyone else. And again, this is the reason why the temple needs to be restored, because once the temple be restored, humanity for the first time in their life will have a visual what sacred space is, what holiness is, how conduct should be done, how you enter the courts, how you exit, how you bring an offering, how you pray as a kingdom. You're not doing things on your own. You're doing it as a body, as a collective unit. And that's something that the Western world is very much individualistic in nature now. We're not really community minded. In the Eastern world, everything is a community, and that's something that we lack of understanding because of the lack of temple. Temple will allow us to really see how the community was in charge of bringing their best to God from the fields so that the priests could live, so that the priests who will do the job of interceding on your behalf, maintaining the connection between God and you, but your offering was their source of income. That was their source of food so they can keep their families going. So there's a reciprocal relationship between God and the people, and who benefited? Everyone. So the temple is extremely important. And what I worry about is that the lack of understanding of the temple will lead people to slander the temple once it will become evident that it will be that construction will eventually happen. And a word of warning to anyone who's listening and watching: when the altar is dedicated, if you don't study the temple, don't say a thing, because if you speak against the altar, you're speaking against the authority of God. And that's something many people do not know how to connect. We can connect that very easy. After God forgave Israel on Mount Sinai, Moses came down from the mountain, and he sacrificed. He did some offerings. He took half of the blood, he sprinkled on the people, and the other he sprinkled on the altar, making and indexing a connection between Israel's condition and obedience. And if they disobeyed, then it will profane the altar. The sacrifices was the mechanism to support the priests and the Levites, but also to bring to the Lord the blood necessary to restore life, because our sins damage sacred space, just like a husband's adultery damages the marriage bed, sacred space.
Yeah, and this is why I think the altar in Ezekiel was the central point of the movement of Ezekiel in and then out of the temple as he is revealed the vision by the angel. And so it's a very key point in which we come to and enter the presence of God. And it's yes. I don't think it's by chance that in Romans 12 we are called, the believer is called to live as a living sacrifice.
Well, that's, by the way, do you know that Judaism does that today? From the moment they get up to the moment they go to sleep, everything is worship. They go to the bathroom, they say a prayer. They drink a juice, they say a prayer. They pray in the morning and the afternoon. They eat something, they do a prayer. They behave, not all of them, but they're supposed to behave with righteousness and justice, loving your neighbor as yourself. That's exactly what the temple teaches us. So even the prayers in the Siddur are structured after the temple protocol. So when you read the prayers, you become the living offering to the Lord. That's the whole idea. So there's so much to learn, and I pray that people would consider giving me the opportunity to share about the beauty of the house, man. I mean, there's no words can describe my passion, my love for the house of God. I mean, I love Yeshua, clearly. I love the Messiah. I know he gave me access to the kingdom, but man, he was zealous for the house of God too, remember?
Yeah.
He cleansed it of its corruption. And that's something that we need to go back to that.
So on a little bit of a different note, what would you say would be the purpose of the temple if it were to be constructed in the modern age?
Eden restored. The temple was Eden.
Yeah.
People don't realize the temple was designed as a garden.
Yeah.
The priests wore white because the priest was supposed to represent Adam.
Absolutely.
So the temple being restored is God will rule. That's exactly the best way I can answer you is by Ezekiel 43, verse 5 and 6. Ezekiel 43, 5 and 6 says this. It says, "On the glory of the Lord entered the temple, and the gate was facing east. The Spirit filled me up, and brought me up in the inner court. And behold, the glory of the Lord filled the temple. While the man was standing beside me, I heard one speaking to me out of the temple. And he said to me, Son of man, this is the place of my throne, the place of the soles of my feet, where I will dwell with I will dwell in the midst of the people of Israel forever. I mean, I don't think I could add anything more than that.
Amen.
Is God's throne. That's where he's going to bring the enemies to submission. And I want the throne of God to be restored again on the earth. That's why I teach the temple.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amen. It's a great way to end, I think.
Thank you, guys.
It's been a real treat to get to interview you, Rico, and really great to see you again. And yeah.
And thank you so much for the work that you've done with your wider team on this Temple app. It's brilliant. It's really great. And I know there's been a lot of sacrifice in that. So we thank you for your sacrifice. We thank you for the teaching that you have given, and that's accessible online. And just remind our audience where they can get this Temple app if they've been inspired to do so from this podcast.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. And you can go to your Temple app store, look for Second Temple, the word Second Temple, and you can pay and you can download it and you can go through the whole temple. You're going to learn a lot. And first, more than anything, I want to say, first, thank to the Lord, and for the opportunity to serve him. And thank for my teacher, Joseph Good, because I cannot take credit for the research. He's done the research. I helped a little bit, but my help was more to help him bring that reality that dream to reality. And I'm grateful because I've learned a great deal. So I wish I could take all credit, but I can't. So I want to give honor to my teacher and go to his website, Hatikva Ministries. And I think you'll learn a lot from us. Come to our temple course or go to wisdomandtorah.com. And there I have my courses that I teach on the temple. And I want to thank you guys because I know you're doing a great job with the third temple model. I can't wait to see it. And anything that I could do to help show the world the beauty of the third temple is amazing. We focus on Second Temple period because the whole New Testament was written in a time frame.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's something that also people need to see, the beauty of that third temple. And I cannot wait to see your work being done. So God bless you guys and thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Rico.
Thank you, Rico. It's been a real pleasure.